Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Joanna Bucknell, and you are listening to episode 6 of TAIT, that's TAIT, which is short for Talking About Immersive Theatre. Pretty much as the title of the podcast suggests, I go out and about and I talk to people who are involved in making, performing, directing and producing immersive performance, about the work that they do and some of the processes that they have to go through to get that work out to you, the general public. So, let's just get to it. I'm here at Battersea Arts Centre with artist and producer Seth Kriebel to talk about his immersive performance work. So Seth, could you tell everyone who's at home listening a little bit about yourself and your background?
My background is not originally in theatre. I studied film at university and worked in that for a little while, and sort of drifted into art forms that were more participatory. Mm-hmm. And since moving to the UK, 15 years ago now, I started as a producer working, running an artist development company called Rules and Regs, which did artist development residencies, and gradually started growing my process on the side of that. Okay.
What do you think drives that move into making your own work?
The drive, I don't know if I can really answer that because I've always been interested in making my own work. It's just finding I've always been interested in making my own work, so the producer activity is more something that supplements that. Mm-hmm. It's just about finding the right modes of expression for that work. So the Rules and Regs work, where I was really supporting other artists in their development, that program had a very, very strong curatorial strand that I found really interesting. We would make rules by which the artist had to make new work. So there was a strong involvement. I wasn't just organizing who went where, when, and that sort of thing. It was really getting involved with the artist. So that, to me, was making my own work after a fashion, but more direct engagement with audiences. That's always been interesting. It's just finding the right, like I say, the right sorts of delivery for that.
And I think it's one of the things in some ways, isn't it, that's kind of slightly different to theatre in that sort of traditional sense, and that in terms of things that might be considered performance in that broad sense, are much more interdisciplinary, and you find that everybody is kind of involved in everything because the way the work is made is very different, I think, to theatre.
I don't have any formal theatre training, which anyone who's seen my work will probably be able to tell you straight away. I do work with theatre makers, they're called proper theatre makers, who have been trained in how to do this, so that when I start throwing these odd ideas out, they have the toolbox to say, okay, that's interesting, and maybe it would be best put in front of an audience this way, and we can sort of move together. They, coming from a more traditional theatre background, and me coming from that's interesting, a bit of a magpie kind of background, and together we find the right way to put it in this context.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's not uncommon actually with this kind of work. People like Robert Wilson come from a completely different background to the theatre, and I think it kind of started in the 60s really, didn't it, this sort of shift. And actually, I'm a maker myself, and when I come to try and collaborate with other people, I find actors the most problematic, and I much prefer to work with people from outside of that sort of formal training.
Well, I have a young daughter, and when I'm talking to the other parents at her school, who are just a cross section of the British public, they always refer to me as an actor, and I always find it a little jarring because I can't act. I have no idea how to pretend to be someone else, which I know is a bit of a broad strokes definition of actor,
of course.
But that's something I can't do.
I have exactly the same when I say to people, what do you do when I'm in theatre? Like, oh, you're an actor. And instantly you're kind of like, I don't actually know how to kind of...
Not really.
No. So it is difficult. So that leads me to my next question, really, which is, what do you think at the moment makes your work distinctive?
Distinctive? I don't know if it is. There are companies making game-inspired work, certainly. Mm-hmm. There are companies making immersive work. And there are companies and individuals making work where those two things intersect, and I think I'm sort of in that area. And it's not a hugely broad field.
No.
So amongst those people who are doing things that are roughly similar to the sort of stuff I like, I think we all just have our own different approaches and different aesthetics. So I'm not familiar with anyone else who is currently working in the niche within the niche that I'm doing. You know, it's the same sort, the broad strokes is the same sort of thing, but I follow this aesthetic and this mode of interacting, and this is how I build a show, and other people do it slightly differently, and so there's a nice variety of different ways to approach a similar interest.
I think you've touched on something there that I'm really interested in kind of chatting to you about, and I've talked to other people about this too, but this term immersive, I mean, for me as a maker and as an academic, it's so problematic because it's so broad. It's kind of used to talk about everything, and the Londonist actually said about A House Repeated that your work turns the concept of immersive theatre on its head. And I've noticed in some of the things your work's talked about as performance games, other things it's talked about as interactive. So how would you talk about the work?
It's a tricky one, and I use the word immersive fairly flippantly because it's one of the terms that's floating around out there now, which a lot of people are starting to use. So it's useful in that it might give people a way into the work. They might think, oh, it's sort of like that. So I try not to get overly hung up on terms, which is maybe a hangover from my rules and regs days when we were sort of nominally working in the field of live art, and then that opens up a whole problematic, what is that?
Yes.
avenue. And that was a big discussion 10, 12 years ago. Yeah. So now, immersive. My work is definitely interactive. It is completely interactive. There is no piece where I could do it to an empty room, which again is kind of maybe a broad strokes way of defining interactive. In terms of immersive, it is, I guess the way immersive is usually used as a shorthand for some sort of promenade theater, where with usually a lot of production design. So a big environment is made, and audience is given more or less carte blanche to go where they like, and that's great. My work is not immersive in that way, and perhaps that's not a term I should be using. I know Exeunt the other day had a big article on about what immersive, what's wrong. I don't want to do them a disservice. Let me start that over. Exeunt the other day had a big article on talking about immersive theater and where it's going and where it's been and what that term means. So I tend to think about my work as interactive, as storytelling. It's immersive in the sense, it's imaginary immersive, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
The basic aesthetic which I tend to use in most shows is very lo-fi. There's nothing in the room. It is the exact opposite of a punch drunk.
Yes.
Which really high-end, detailed, lovely production design. I've got a room, maybe a chair, that's it. Yeah. But I come at it more from a storytelling point of view and describe an environment and try to get the audience to join me in imagining it. And then I tell them what options they might have to move around or do things in that imaginary environment. And then they say, well, I want to go through the door. And then I tell them what. Now you're in another space, and now it is like this, and now you can do this or that. So it sort of functionally works like immersive theater and interact. Immersive theater is interactive in the sense that the audience is interacting with the environment. They're moving from point A to point B and not staying in their chair. But immersive theater is often not interactive in that it's really just promenade theater. They don't mess with the actors. The actors are up, the performers
Absolutely,
are...
I agree. I mean, those worlds and they're beautiful and they're nuanced, and you get something very specific out of it. I think there's this assumption that if it's immersive, then you have agency in a specific way, and I don't think you do in a lot of that.
You might have some, you might choose to look at this instead of looking at that.
Yeah.
When in a traditional cross-arch deal, you can choose to be there, and then you can choose to close your eyes or not, and apart from that, that's kind of it. That is your only agency as an audience member. So something traditionally called immersive, you have a bit more going on than that, in that you can follow this character or go look over there where no one is at the moment.
Yeah.
So it gives you a bit more, but it's just promenade, which is, I don't mean it's just promenade in a pejorative sense. It's promenade theatre, whereas interactive can be end-on proscenium arch stuff, but there's some kind of feedback mechanism between audience and performer, and the show is shaped by that interaction. And I know most actors will tell you there is a feedback of energy and laughter, and yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a bit more defined, explicit, systemic interaction.
Well, I think, I mean, I've researched immersive, very broadly, immersive work, and I think at the moment there's almost two kinds, because people like Josephine Machon and Gareth White, who've written all the books about it, so far have talked about the fact that immersive isn't kind of an access to an interior. That's fine, but I've noticed that there's a whole nother lot of work, which I think yours is kind of more falls into the camp of work that we work together to make that fictive space, rather than that fictive space already existing for us to enter into.
Yes, if space is broadly more than just a three-dimensional space.
Yes, in that kind of really conceptual, material and conceptual kind of way.
So my work is interactive, definitely, immersive, maybe, depends on how you define it. But it does have that very lo-fi, nothing here, we're just going to talk and we're going to sort of imagine together aesthetic at the other end of the spectrum from your Punch Drunks or your Secret Cinemas, which is very, very tangible and highly designed environments. So I'm at the other end of the spectrum from them, and then to some extent I'm also toward the other end of the spectrum from them on the interactive front.
Yeah.
The producer David Micklem called my work austerity punch drunk, which I think is brilliant. I'd love to put on a poster at some point, because it's...
Well, you build it in you. So in the fact that Punch Drunk's work is kind of immersive, in the fact that you enter into a whole other world.
Yeah, that's a good
with your
way,
work, you kind of your mind, your imagination almost becomes the site. So it's immersive because you're fundamental to the construction of that conceptual space.
Yes, and this is part of the problem, part of the difficulty of making the work is that it's very, very hard to make in isolation. I mean, we're speaking now of a few hours before I'm doing some scratches of a new piece, because you can only write it so far before then you have to put it in front of an audience who will give you an answer to the question, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
So you can test if the gears that you've put in place work, if the scenarios come to life when you throw them at somebody who's not heard them before.
Well, that kind of bumps me on actually a few questions, because that's what I make fairly similar kind of work, and I think it very much comes from a kind of a live art place. It's really interesting that you kind of talked about that earlier, but the difficulty I find is in the R&D process, there literally is only so far you can go before you require those participants, because the work doesn't exist without them. So I was going to ask you about the kind of the challenges of how do you manage that? I still haven't found a great way of managing that.
It's very difficult. I've been following a fairly similar seam for several shows in a row, and then there's one or two shows that are kind of splitting off into different directions. So for the newer work, I can build on a lot of the experience I've gained along the way.
Yeah.
So when I was making A House Repeated, I had the experience of, I think at that time, 5 years worth of different versions of the Unbuilt Room.
Yeah.
So House Repeated is longer, and it has different sections where more happens. But I wasn't starting from complete starting line. I had an interaction method already basically in place from the Unbuilt Room. And then there's a lot of just trying to think it through and working at the desk with a piece of paper, which I think is out of fashion now, or it's been for a while.
I'm really old-fashioned. I use papers. I use paper still as well.
But then eventually you do need to stick it in front of some people. So it's having supportive people and institutions who will give you a room and a place to scratch. Or I've done work in progress things at the whoever's editing this, cut that out, please. 'Cause I almost just slipped there. I'm getting very tired. I've done work in progress things at the Marlborough Theatre in Brighton. It's very supportive. BAC here, fantastic. They're another home from home for me now. And there are groups of people who I trust to bring in very early, who have seen the work before, and who are not surprised by what happens, but you need to test, is this particular thing going to work? And then once you get it to a certain point, then you can put it out to a public scratch process like we're doing tonight, where we'll have people who might not have seen anything like this before getting a first taste, but we're still in a real bumpy phase. And you just, there is no substitute. You can run it in rehearsal assuming you know what the audience is going to come back to as much as you like, but there is no substitute for throwing it out to a real brain and having someone give you a curveball back that you just had no idea what was coming.
Yeah, and I think that's always the case, isn't it? You always try and anticipate potentially people's reactions, responses, but there's always, I found something that throws you a complete curveball and you're like, wow, okay, I never even considered it from that perspective.
As much as you can build up a form, a mode of interaction where you say this, I say this, and we go back and forth, even no matter how tightly scripted it is, and all of my stuff is really very, very tightly scripted, you find in the actual moment of performance, you have to rely a lot on, I hesitate to call them improv skills because it's not actor comedy improv skills, but within that very tightly defined kind of algorithm that you've come up with, when the audience throws in something, you sort of have to trust yourself to put it through the black box, and whatever pops out in that moment pops out.
And I think there's some, I was going to ask you about this too, there's a real skill to performing in this way, and there's no kind of training you can do that prepares you for it. I think it literally comes from some experience. I was going to ask you about how you felt about what happens in performance.
It's just a building up experience over the years. Like I say, a lot of these shows have very similar interaction methods. I've lost track of how many different versions of the Unbuilt Room I've done, which is the 6 people at a time, 20-minute kind of basic version of this interactive fiction storytelling stuff that I do. And I've done bespoke versions for this museum or that theater. So the content has changed, but the form stays the same, and the form, the way in which you interact with the audience stays the same. So you just build up a skill set of when somebody thinks they're being clever and throws that one at you, and they're looking very smug, and you're thinking, I've heard this for the past 3 years, and you have it ready. But the first time that someone threw that at you, you had to think on your feet. I don't know, you just get, the only thing I can think it's like is a stand-up comedian who has to be ready for a heckler. And they might have several pat answers ready to throw back at somebody, but they also have to think on their feet. They have to improv, but they're doing it not in character, but within their performance persona. So when you're doing the work and it is truly interactive, even if, I'm going to come back to what I mean by truly interactive, but when you're doing the work and you're in the moment and you think you have all your plates spinning nicely, and somebody throws something at you. You say, "What would you like to do?" And they say, "I want to," and you go, "Oh, no one's ever said that before." Staying in your performance persona, trusting in the way that you have handled these things in the past, and you just throw something out there, and sometimes sometimes you lose it and you crash and you just. But I guess the way my shows specifically are structured is that I usually start by introducing myself. "Hi, I'm Seth, and we're going to do this now." So when and then I sort of go into a bit more performance-y mode, less chatty mode, a bit more I am the game mode. But still, it's a great pleasure for the audience sometimes when you let them see that you're cracking a bit, and you kind of he got me there, but we're gonna try to carry this thing on now, and everybody has fun together. And that's the point of the interactive stuff, like you said. You really are working together.
Yeah, and there's a real playfulness, and I think because you're there as yourself, but it's this kind of performative version of yourself that's marshalled by the rules, tasks, or kind of game mechanics that you have set up. And I think you're right in saying it's a case of you just have to trust in all of those things that you've set up and you've spent the time developing, because actually they're the mechanics are actually what, or even if you laugh, even if something goes terribly wrong, you can pick the mechanic up again.
You keep going.
Pushes you through.
The Unbuilt Room was originally came from me thinking about those old, late 70s, early 80s computer games, the interactive fiction stuff like Colossal Cave Adventure, and the really first of the interactive fiction stuff, and that I played growing up, and then taking those that form and what would it be like to do that live, and here we are, however many years later. So the early versions of Unbuilt Room, my performance persona was much different, because I was very much viewing it as me playing the computer.
Yeah.
And over the years, I think I said I'm not an actor, I have no theater training, so over the years I've come to realize that makes conceptual sense, but it's not maybe the best way to bring the audience in. So it's really funny when I think back to the early shows and how much warmer the performance persona is now to then, and how much more effective it is to get people to cooperate in your in this sort of imaginary thing that you're trying to lead them through.
It's about an invitation, isn't it? You have to
you
have to find a way to make even if you're doing something fairly challenging and something quite difficult, for example, like what Adrian Howells does, but it's the way the invitation is couched and the way that you're made complicit, I think, becomes significant for whether the audience will play with you or not.
I work with a theatre maker called Zoe Boraz a lot. She's in A House Repeated. She's in the new piece tonight. And we talk a lot in rehearsals and in devising, because the game is largely written, and then we take it into space and devise a bit of how it will be sort of realized. And we talk a lot about invitations and permissions, because you can tell an audience that they can talk to each other.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're going to. The number of times I talk with each other, it'll really help if you talk with each other, and then a third of the way through the show, no one has spoken to their neighbor, and at some point someone will say, "Can we talk to each other?" I'm just thinking, I did tell you.
Many times,
but just saying it
Yeah.
doesn't mean it, because you have how many years of being told to shut up in the theater.
Of course, and it's ingrained, isn't it, in those spaces.
Yeah. So to give permission to behave in a slightly different way, you know, so there's the invitation to come, we're going to do this together, and then it's okay, you can do these other things, invitations and permissions.
And I think a little bit of damage was done in the 1960s with some participation that was difficult and challenging, and that was really confrontational. So sometimes the word participation and interaction frightens lots of people because of that legacy.
Mm.
So I think that sort of plays into it as well. People are like, are you tricking me? Do you mean it?
Oh man.
Can I actually? Or am I going to be now singled out and humiliated?
Oh yeah, and I think all audiences are like this. I know English audiences are particularly, do not make me, single me out. And the number of times, very early in a piece, someone will willfully, let me maybe explain this differently. The number of times very early on in a piece, at the beginning we'll do a little tutorial. This is how you express what you want to do. This is how we're going to talk with each other. Let's try it out. So I might say to you this, and you give a real gentle, hey, it's just me, we're here, we're talking, just two people. And you give a real easy lead. So you can open the door. What would you like to do? And you say, I want to run away. And you, well, okay. But that is within, that is your right. If you want to say, I want to run away, it's probably not going to get you real far within the structure of the game.
Yeah.
And I just gave you a nice gentle lead. So maybe take it. And you talk to people after, and they say, oh, well, I thought you were trying to trick me.
Yes,
and you give them absolutely no reason to think that.
No.
But there's something that just said, no, there's no, the audiences come in with very little trust.
Yes.
And that's not their fault. It's something that you need to be aware of, and you need to build trust from the absolute moment that they hear about the show in the way that it's publicized, and from the moment they meet you, and then you absolutely cannot trick them. No. Or it's all gone.
Yeah, immediately.
But if you do, if you are honest about it, this is what we're doing, it's fine, and they gradually start to come out of their shells and okay, I guess I do trust you, and it is just us in here, and he hasn't asked anyone to stand up and sing, or take off their clothes, or do anything crazy, and thus far he hasn't done anything crazy, so okay, that you can really, really get people very involved, and everybody has their own starting line on that, and some people will, boom, jump straight in, some people will jump alarmingly straight in, and other people, you work and you work and you work and you don't get, nope, still in the shell. And, there's always going to be kind of ends of the bell curve. Yes. But if you can get the tail end to come a little bit, like invitations, and honesty. We're not trying to trick you, we're just going to have some fun.
Mm-hmm. But I think it is, especially in Britain, there's that legacy of fiction and kind of a fictive space in terms of theatre. So I think there's always that worry, are you for real? Do you think different spaces make a difference? So if you were to do it in a gallery setting, or which you have in museums and things, do you engender more trust immediately in those spaces? No,
I don't know why. I think it's more something with a national character. No, that's not fair to say, because I haven't tried it in other countries. I think it's maybe something more it's not to do with the arts or with theater, it's to do with society, with how people treat people. I might have a guess, and it is, I hasten to add, a guess as to why English audiences, more than British, but just English audiences, are very, very reluctant to engage. One, I'm sure there are lots of factors here, and we're talking very broad strokes. One of the things as an outsider that is very difficult to negotiate or to navigate in English society is the use of subtext. You just cannot be honest. You just cannot say what you mean. And I've been accused of all kinds of things when what I was really shooting for was sincerity. And then, I mean that. Just there it is. So it takes a while for people to understand that there isn't something hidden here. And that's a tricky thing to do. and I don't want to be hard on English audiences. It's a tricky thing to do when you're used to working in this way and someone else comes at you in a different way.
Yeah.
You have to bridge that gap and make your way there. And you can kind of see, because where's the one in current British performance, and I'm not an academic, the one place that jumps straight out to me as the place where you can interact is panto.
Yes, absolutely. We have a huge history of that kind of interaction.
And panto's for kids.
Yes.
And it's also the place where the adults know the rules of interaction, and they know they're not going to get singled out. Or if they do, like if the wicked stepsister singles you out for a little bit of a joke, it's not that bad.
It's okay.
It's okay. Yeah. They'll poke gentle fun at you, but really it's cool.
Yeah.
Children's theater is interactive because the kids haven't learned that everything is subtext yet.
No, exactly. They take it at face value,
still,
don't they? They trust.
Yeah, at that age of openness and trust and surface, you can do interaction without any trouble. Mm-hmm. And panto is the one thing that kind of carries that through to adulthood because it's very, very strictly defined. Mm-hmm. We're going to a panto. Here are the rules. Everybody knows the rules. Half the characters talk to the audience, recognizing that the audience is there.
Yes.
Not pretending it's a fourth wall and that it's not cinema,
Yes.
So in those narrow situations, interaction is very easily possible. Outside of that, you have to work pretty hard to gain the audience's enough openness from the audience to make it okay, to let them know it's safe enough that we can now we can interact, and it's so different. And again, I know we're talking about immersive, and we've gone on about interactive.
Yeah, but I think there is
there's a blur, but I think there's a mistake that people, like we were talking about earlier, people mistake immersive for interactive.
Yes, absolutely. And I think different people, and I actually found that in A House Repeated, I thought it was extremely clear and extremely honest. I mean, I'm kind of ideal audience because I'm game, so I'll jump in, not too in, like, because some people go...
Some people go in
immediately hard, and it's quite terrifying sometimes as a performer to manage that situation. But I think I'm kind of the ideal. I'll take a minute to figure out what's going on, but then I'll be game, I'll play, even if it's difficult for me, but it's because I love it. So I always have to remember that as a maker myself, as well as I'm like, what's going to give permission and make that invitation in a way. And sometimes I always ask myself, what would my nan do? Would my nan get this? Would she know what I'm asking here and what my expectations are of you? And so that's kind of my safety. I'm like, would my nan understand this? Was kind of your sort of okay? How would whoever catch this?
There are a lot of negatives about not having any theater training. One of the potential positives is I tend to think about it not as a theater maker, but more as a designer or an engineer. And so I'm trying to think, okay, what is the experience that I am trying to make for the audience? Yeah. And I've talked to people with visual arts training about this a lot.
Yes.
And they think that's insane. Which... what is the audience experience? Well, I can't think about that. I have to follow my...
Yes.
It's like, no, that's fine. It's coming from you, but you are trying to communicate. Yeah. You are putting something into the world for someone else to apprehend. So what experience are you trying to engender in the apprehender? And if you're not designing that, then you're doing it wrong. Like you say, you will my nan get this? That's a nice, I think about, would my mom and dad, would they get this? And if the answer, well, it depends on the audience that I'm trying to reach. If it's a general public audience, I need to go, like, give me a few minutes. I'll finish this thought. So, sorry, editor. There are several different versions of Unbuilt Room that have developed over the years for different audiences. So when you're doing a art theater audience, you can sort of skip ahead a little bit through the intro. There might not be these sort of more poetic breaks in the middle, or they might be introduced slightly differently. When it's a general public audience, then, I mean, we learned this the hard way doing a show at the Science Museum, and I found myself quoting Dostoevsky at a 7-year-old, and neither of us were having a good time with it.
Wow.
Yeah, and I thought, after that you kind of go back and re-examine and think, okay, what would he have liked?
Yeah.
He wanted another puzzle. Okay,
Yeah.
let's do another puzzle. And then the theater crowd, they might appreciate that punctuating moment of heightened language or movement or something that might not work in the other context. So you're still doing the same thing, but you're tailoring it to try to make that experience that you are offering. You have to know to whom you are offering it.
Yes, and I think it in some senses there can be general, but I think often you are speaking or making that invitation to a specific audience. And I think venues like this draw a really particular audience, and I think most spaces are like that. I mean, when I come to BAC, I expect really specific kinds of work, and I come to BAC for that kind of work. Yeah. If I wanted something else, I'd go maybe to the National. If I wanted new writing, I go to the Royal Court. But if I want to see this kind of work, I come to the BAC or the Vaults or something like that. So I think there are expectations that come with those audiences, and they're kind of trained in a way.
Oh, sure. or it sort of self-selects. I like. Someone took me to BAC. I saw the show. I liked it, and I like that sort of thing. And you just sort of start to find the places to which you gravitate.
Yeah.
I don't go to the Royal Opera House very much because it's not really my thing.
No.
But I come here as much as I can because it's great. But then when you move broader outside of capital A art contexts, and you're in a festival. We did Latitude last year. Well, even Latitude has a very kind of arty audience. It's not the best example. But you go to a museum, you're doing a piece in a museum, or you're doing a piece at a different family festival. Then the people who really don't want to engage in some sort of weird performance game thing aren't going to.
No.
And fine, that's fine. I don't want anybody. I don't want to force anybody in if they're not interested. It's okay. Yeah. But some people might peek their head around the door, and then you need to be there to say, okay, let's come in. Ready for them, instead of, oh, you don't speak Italian? Well, this opera's not really for you.
Yeah.
Door closed.
And I think that's really interesting. I mean, I was really taken by House Repeated because I've been coming, I realised recently, to this venue for 15 years. Which is quite terrifying, actually. It makes me feel old. But I have a really specific relationship with this building, and sitting and participating in that work made me really reflect not on the possibility, or on the possibilities of what it could be, but also on the possibilities of all the things that it has been for me. And there was something I really loved about that. Yet my students, lots of them came, and it's the first time they've been to BAC, and secondly, the first time they've been to something immersive, to broadly use that term. And actually one of my students made a kind of a mistake. She left the performance thinking she actually had to go around. She didn't realise her mistake till she tried to come back in. So I thought that was really interesting. So Adam Alston, who's an academic at Surrey University, I think, has recently been talking about this idea of errant audiences in immersive work. And I was wondering how much you came across, like what my student did in a House Repeated when you did that here.
Not much. And I remember that show where someone very excitedly got up and ran out. And so I was talking to Zoe about it afterwards, and we were both going, what?
Yeah, it was one of my students.
Okay. I mean, on one hand, I'm glad she was enthusiastic. That's great. She didn't just sit there like a lump. No, sometimes you can see that people have expectations that something else is going to happen.
Yeah.
And less so in a House Repeated, which is sort of a more crafted piece with, it has a very intentional arc, and we start here, and then at this point you pivot to this, and then at this point something else happens, and it provides a resolution or a landing, and then we're done. Thank you very much. Unbuilt Room is timed.
Yeah.
So and I tell you that at the beginning, and I show you the timer, and I turn the timer on, and then I set it down, and when the timer rings, regardless of what's happening, boom, done, thanks. And which is brilliant because frustration is such a big part of exploration that people, we want to know what's behind the door. Sorry. But because you very clearly set out the rules in both cases, we're going to do this is how it goes. And in the first 2 minutes, people get the feeling, get the idea of what's going on. It's very, very rare that someone thinks something else is suddenly going to happen or they need to act a certain way. I mean, literally 3 times out of the hundreds of times I've done Unbuilt Room, and however many I've done House Repeated now, just for those 2 shows. Very, very few times somebody has stood up and moved and broken all we do is we sit and we talk.
Well, the rules of engagement are very clear as well. I thought as soon as you explain what's happening, it's like, okay, great, I know exactly how to engage and how to play within these parameters here. So it's interesting because it never even crossed my mind to get up and leave. So I was so interested in the fact that she felt pushed in order to do that, which I thought was really interesting.
I think at that point when you're coming with a load of other maybe expectations. You're coming with a load of other expectations floating around that you think you know what this is going to be, and then it's not that. It's very clear what it is, but whether it's someone who, like we were talking about, isn't usually willing to interact, or it's somebody who thinks it's going to be a highly designed environment show, or it's someone who thinks whatever, all of these different expectations and assumptions come into the room, and this holds true for all performance. Everybody brings their assumptions and expectations, and it's how you take that disparate group, get everyone gently lined up, and invite them to maybe walk this way.
And I think that was done really succinctly and really effectively, I thought, in A House Repeated. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the scratch tonight.
Well, don't get your hopes up too high. The secret to a happy life is low expectations.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. There's loads of other things I want to ask you, but the reality is I know you're really pushed for time, and I'm really grateful you took the time out to talk to me today.
No, it's been a pleasure, thank you. Sorry I have to run on.
No, that's fine. So I'm sure people at home are thinking, so where can I potentially catch your work? So is there anything kind of coming up in the next sort of 6-7 months or so that we should be looking out for?
A House Repeated will be on tour.
Excellent.
A few dates in the middle of the summer, and then really through the autumn and into early 2017.
Great.
And I'm developing a new piece, again, back here at BAC, in early 2017. We'll start scratching that.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm scratching tonight is actually on in the Brighton Festival within 2 weeks.
Wow, okay.
The 20th and 21st of May, so I imagine that will already have gone.
Yeah, I might have to tweet. I'll tweet about that because I live quite near Brighton anyway. So yes, I'll tweet it out.
So that's what this is for. But really, House Repeated is going to be out on tour, and then working on a new piece of another imagined, immersive, interactive thing.
Where's the best place for people to find out about these things? Is it your website, Twitter, Facebook?
Website, which is sethkriebel.com, which then directs you to individual show websites and all over the place.
Lovely. And are you on Twitter as well?
Yes, at Seth Kriebel. Yeah.
Excellent. So it's easy to find you, and I'm sure people at home will be going and having a look now. So again, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
I really hope that you enjoyed that episode. Please do share with anyone else you think might find it interesting, insightful, or useful. And do get in touch. I love to hear your thoughts, comments, and feedback. And you can do that in so many different ways, but the best way is usually via social media. So you can leave a comment on Facebook, on YouTube, or you can tweet me on Twitter. Next month in episode 7, I am going to be talking to Anthony from Death's Head Productions, who is a practitioner who visited London last month from New York City. And I'm not going to say any more than that at this stage. Next month, all will be revealed. So please do tune in. All right then, until next month. Bye-bye. Just a little PS. Tickets for Wishbox are now on sale at the New Theatre Royal. So if you'd like to come down and participate, then you can get your tickets either online on the New Theatre Royal's website or via their booking line or over the counter if you're based in Portsmouth. And one final little thing, I just wanted to give a shout out to my mum and dad to say congratulations, because on the 9th of October, it's actually their 40th wedding anniversary, which is enormous. So congratulations, mum and dad. 40 years, Ruby wedding anniversary. Nice one. All right then, until next month. Bye-bye.